In the last video, we set up Mongoose with Mongo and started getting data from our forms and saving that data in MongoDB. We ran into a problem at the end though, and that problem is the statelessness of the web, meaning you can be on the registration form and you can create a user, but when you go to another page, it's another page, and that data doesn't travel with you by default. How do we register or log in, and then when we go to another page, actually know who that person is and can change the website and behave appropriately for that user? And so that's the kind of thing we're going to tackle in this video. This video is also still going to continue to focus on the happy path of successful logins and successful registrations. It will be in the next video that we dig more into showing errors, but that's not it right now. Right now we're getting things working. We're getting things plugged in so that we can get people authenticated and on the site in an authenticated state. So let's go ahead and jump in. In terms of the libraries we're going to need this time, we're going to need a library called Express Session, and so that will give us basic session implementation for Express. We're also going to need something called Passport, and so Passport is something that's going to handle our authentication and sort of glue Session together with some of the work we've already done in terms of authentication. And so by bringing in Session and Passport, we're going to solve this problem of going from one page to another and knowing who the person is. So let's get started with this. We'll begin by installing a few things. I'm going to install Express Session. And so this is the Session implementation. I'm also going to install, let's go ahead and do that one separately. Let's see, npm install Express Session. Well, I misspelled session. Npm install Passport. Now, Passport is a library for Node for authentication, and you actually will install Passport when you use it and install generally something else, a strategy. Passport, think of it as a generic package for doing authentication and that kind of thing within Node. And then think of you can do a strategy for local authentication, which is what we're going to do here, where we specify our own username and password. Or Google authentication if you want to log in with Google. Or Twitter authentication if you want to log in with Twitter, and so forth. We're just going to be working with the local package, so we're going to do npm install Passport local. Okay. Those are installed. Let's get them hooked up. We're going to start with our server file. There's a few things I'm going to need here. One of them is Session itself. And the other one is Passport. So let's get started with Session and do that one first. Session is implemented, or Express Session is implemented as middleware. And so we are going to use app.use to bring that in. And then say call Session. This is the function we just imported. And we're going to pass some values in. Take a look at what all of these values mean. We need a random string to use to assign our cookies. And this is a basic Session implementation. We can use this to keep track of information about the user or about anything. And we're going to be using it, or Passport is going to be using it for keeping track of who the user is. And we'll see that in action soon. Now, for Passport itself, we have to tell it to use Passport, and so we say passport.initialize, and then we need to say app.use passport session. And now there's a number of things around Passport that we have to configure. We could do them right here if we wanted to, but I don't want to do them right here. What I want to do is I want to separate this out into another file because it's actually a good bit of code. So let's do that. So I'm going to create another file called passport config, and we're going to put our configuration here. Now we installed the Passport local strategy, so let's bring that in. And let's also bring in our user model. We're going to need that here in a minute. You will see why. Okay. And so the way I'm going to do this is I am going to I'm going to export a function. And I am going to say function configure. And I'm going to pass in the Passport instance that was actually created in the server. And then what I want to do is I'm going to go down here at the very bottom and I'm going to module.exports equals this. And export that. Alright, so going up here to the top, there's a few things we need to do. First of all is we need to basically tell Passport itself to use the local strategy. So it won't by default just automatically use it. So we have to tell it, all right, Passport, use a new local strategy. And we're going to pass a function into here. But instead of typing it all out right there, what I want to do is I want to just separate it out for understandability's sake into a separate function. And so the purpose of this function is it's going to run anytime you want essentially a route to handle a user authentication, a login attempt. So we're going to say, we called it strategy func. We're going to pass in username, password, and then a done function. And this done function is what's going to be fired when we are done. So to check to see if the username and password is correct, we need to do what we did before, which is call that static authentication method. And so we'll pass in username and password, and then we'll get a function, and that will have either an error or a user. And depending on which one it is, we'll do different things. And that's actually, if we take a look at what we're doing here and look at auth, what we were doing in the post for auth, we're actually going, in the post for login, we're actually going to be replacing this bit here with what we're doing in the Passport config. So let's see. So user authenticate, if there is an error, I'm going to console log, once again, just console logging at this point. And I will call the done function and I will pass the error. Alright, so if there is a user, what I'm going to do is I am going to console log local strategy, and then call done and pass a null for the error, and the user objects, I'll pass that on so that it can be used, and so it can be saved in session. And then finally, In this last case, this is the same as the other case. Couldn't find the user, something like that. This is a generic error case. It's console log. And then we'll call done, and we'll pass null and false. Now, there's a couple of other things that need to be done. After we have done this, we also need to supply a few other things. One, we need to tell Passport how to serialize and deserialize the user, and this has to do with getting the user in and out of session, identifying who it is, and then putting that user in there. So Passport serialize user. Passport deserialize user. This will put the user object actually in memory in session so we can use it. And that's user.findById. This is a Mongoose function. And that should be it for our configuration here. We've exported everything, so let's bring this into the server and use it. And so let's bring that in. So it's passport config, and I exported a configure function. So I'm going to pass in passport there. And that should configure Passport. All right, so that created the local strategy, which is going to use Mongoose. I have configured session. We put the Passport configuration in a separate file. Now what we need to do is we need to go to what I was talking about earlier in saying we were going to replace the login post. Because we put all this in the code for Passport, we actually don't need this here. We can do this. We can say Passport. We're going to use the local authentication, the local Passport. This is the name that is associated with this particular strategy. And so this local strategy. So, and that's important. You got to have that right. And so what we'll do is we'll say, okay, authenticate using the local strategy, and if everything's good, then we want you to success redirect to home. However, if things aren't good, send them to login. And so now what will happen is whenever someone does a get to login, they will get the page rendered. That doesn't change. But now when the post happens, they're going to essentially hand over responsibility for the post to Passport. We're not going to be handling that all manually. We have some code in Passport config for the post, and this is that code here for calling user.authenticate. But we're basically using Passport to glue some of these things together. And we'll talk a bit in a minute, a little bit about what this gives you. So we, in theory, at this point, can log in. Let's try it. We've done a lot of coding without writing anything. There's a reasonable chance that there's issues somewhere, and in fact, there is. Passport is not defined. Where in the world? Auth.js, line 8. So this is where we just were, actually, over here, login. So Passport authenticate. All right, well, let's bring it in. All right, server's restarting. Index page is working, login is working. No errors yet. Let's pass in our user that we know is there to see if this works. And we got redirected to home. It looks like there was a successful login, and look, local strategy, successful login. This was a console log from this session. All right, so what have we actually gained here? Before we were already logging in. Do we get anything out of this? And the answer is absolutely yes. I want to open up the general JS routes file because this has our home route in it, and I want to look at something. I want to console log req.user. And so Passport, if it's configured correctly, when you log in, it's going to basically take your user object and put it in that property, which means you can use it on any page after you're authenticated. Let's see if this works. I just saved a server file, so the server reset, and so I'm actually not going to see anything here. It says the user undefined. So let's go log in and see if this works. Aha! The user is no longer undefined. It is, in fact, Tanis. And because I have access to that data, I can use it. So let's open up my mustache file for the home and say, welcome username. And so let's go to the route and pass in username. And we're going to get that from req.user.username. If we look at our console, we can see username is a property of user. We can use it. Can I read property username of undefined? Oh no, this is actually fine. This is because I saved the server file, and whenever the server reset, all the data that was in memory was gone. That includes the session data. And so whenever we got to this route right here, we console log user, and if we were to look there in the terminal, we'll see that is undefined right there. But when it gets to here, req.user.username, well, this is username of undefined, and that's invalid. We can't do that. And so we're going to have to deal with this somehow, and this is easy, but we'll get back to it here in a second. Let's go to login and try this again. Welcome, Tanis. Excellent. That worked. Cool. Now let's deal with this error. And so we actually don't want anybody to be able to get to the home page without being authenticated. This is something we mentioned way back in earlier videos. And so how would we do that? Well, one of the common answers for this in solving this kind of problem in Express is to use middleware. So let me create a middleware function, and since I'm only going to be using it right here, I'll just create the function right here. So function auth required. And middleware functions, they take request, response, and next. So I can say, okay, how can I make a determination if someone is logged in or not? What is something I can look at in perhaps the request? And actually this gets to that req.user. We can look to see if there's a user. If there is no user, then they're not logged in. So we can say if request.user, then next, keep going. Everything's good. We're fine. However, if there is no user, then we are going to redirect to login. Now to use this, we have to get it in the pipeline somewhere. This is just declaring a function. We actually haven't told Express to use the middleware. If we want to just have this function for this particular route, we can actually put it right there. Or we could do router.use. I'm just going to leave it as is right there. So this should be good. Now that I've saved those files, the server has reset. And so before we got an error when we came here right after the server reset, what it should do, if we did this correctly, is it should redirect us to login. And so it did. And so now I can't go there. Anytime I go there, it sends me back to login. So if I go back to the default route and I go to the home page, it sends me straight to login. So Tanis test, and there we go. Cool. Another thing I want to add to this authenticated page is I want to create a link for logging the user out. That will allow us to log this user out, create new users, and log them in and see if this whole flow works. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I go to home.mustache, I'm going to create a link right here. And this is going to point to a route, and we'll call it logout. I can put this anywhere. I'm just going to go ahead and put this in the file with the other auth related things. That's not really necessary, but I'm going to do that. So let's see, router.get. If someone goes to logout, let's see, I'm using arrow functions in this file. Let's do it. Request response. And so, at the very least, I'm going, whenever they log out, I'm going to not render, I'm going to redirect them to login. But that doesn't actually log them out. They'll still be logged in when they get there. What I need to do is basically change the in-memory session to say, hey, don't be logged in anymore. And you can do that by doing this. So let's test it. So I've changed the server. If I refresh, I'm not going to be authenticated. It's going to send me to login. Tanis test. This takes me here. If I go to logout, it sends me to login. Let's test to see if it really logged me out. If it had not really logged me out, I would be able to go to home. Let's test this. Let's go back, and I am going to comment this line out so it just redirects to login. So Tanis and test login. Here we go. We are on the home page. We're going to log out, quote unquote, log out. But I can still get to home, and it still knows who I am. And the reason why is the data in memory still has my user there. And so logout needs to be called on the request, because this will actually remove that information. So login, Tanis, test. There we go. Log out. I can no longer get to home. Excellent. If I go to register, I could say Tasselhoff test register. See if this works. We haven't touched this in a while. Did it create an account? Maybe. Let's go check. It didn't log me in and move me to the home. That's something we're going to have to deal with in a second. Here is my post body right there. If we go back to our Mongo shell that we still have open from earlier, we will now actually see Tasselhoff there. Cool. So it does look like we created a user. So if we log in with them, there we go. We have that user there. So we're displaying the user on the home. We are showing, we could really show any information related to the user. We could look up data, which we don't have for this particular site. We've limited the user to only be on, say that again. We limited the user so that someone has to be logged in to view the home route. We did this through session, passport, passport local. There's still some things to do though. I want to go ahead and log people in whenever they register and actually let them go to the home. That needs to be done. So we'll do that actually now before we jump to the next video. Okay, and so let's go back to auth. Right now, when someone does a post to register, it saves the user and it redirects them to home. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't change what is in session. It doesn't go through passport and change that. And so therefore, when it gets to home, it redirects them back to login. This is definitely not what we want it to do. So what we need it to do is actually go through some of that passport logic to make sure session gets updated. So let's do that. So here's our post for register. The saving is still going to work as it does right now. The difference is whenever we're done, we need to change, sort of like what we did with login. If we go look at the post for login, instead of redirecting manually, we need to use passports. So let's do that. So I'm going to put a comma, and after this function will run, it will run this right here, and we can say passport.authenticate local. And assuming this is successful, and right now we are focusing on the success, the happy path, it should redirect us to home. If I recall correctly, this is everything that we need to do here, at least at this point. Another thing, now let's actually just stick with this, and let's see how things go. And so let's switch to Tasselhoff for a bit. Login, does it still work? We didn't change anything there, that should be fine. Let's go to register. And let's put in a new user, Sturm. And terminal, let's see, everything looks fine there. Let's clear it. Let's register the user. We can see that we did post the username and the password. Did we actually create a user? And the answer is yes, there is Sturm. We did create that user, but we actually didn't stay on home. And I have to wonder why. Well, let's go take a look at our code again. It looks like after we saved, we actually went ahead and redirected to home, and we actually don't want to do that. We want Passport to do its stuff. And so this code that we put in earlier, I think might be messing this up. Let's save that. And go back here. It's restarting. Let's go to register. Register Goldmoon. All right. Now I recognize that I've also left something out, and I told you there would be errors along the way. This page is actually, it's hung. It's not going anywhere. And the reason why it's not going anywhere is whenever we came here and we did a post, this function is firing, and I never told it to move on or to end the request. And so it actually doesn't know to go down here into this section and go through Passport. So how am I supposed to do that? Well, we can start treating this as a little bit more like middleware by passing in this next parameter, which isn't technically always needed. But here we'll need it, because what we need to do is whenever we have successfully saved, we need to tell it to go ahead and move on down the chain, which should cause it to go through there. And so let's try it. Register. Let's register Raceland. Clear that out. Yes! Fantastic. A few missteps along the way, but this seems to have worked. Let's log Raceland out. Let's go back to Tasselhoff. Log him in. There we go. Log out. Let's go to Goldmoon. That one worked. Raceland. That one worked. Excellent. Okay. Now we've done everything I wanted to do in this video. Next video, we're going to start dealing with login failures and registration failures. We're going to look at a library called Express Flash Messages. This allows you to temporarily store a message so you can send someone to another page to view it. And that ends up actually being really useful in cases like this. So we're going to look at that library. We are going to deal with a number of different error cases in our login and registration setups. All right, so that's next video.